It is a universally accepted truth that humanity's past holds many secrets. Perhaps within our history lies the key to solving the Fermi paradox. Is it possible that thousands of years ago, Earth was visited by one or more extraterrestrial intelligences? Tonight we look at one of the most controversial, yet perhaps most interesting answers to the Great Silence: the Ancient Astronaut Scenario. So grab a drink and welcome to the bar at the edge of the universe. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the bar at the edge of the universe. I'm your host, Adrian D. Maddox, and tonight we are going to be discussing the Ancient Astronaut Scenario. All right, so where do we begin on this one? The Ancient Astronaut Scenario essentially proposes that throughout humanity's history, we have been visited by extraterrestrials. Specifically, it wants to focus on our ancient history. So think ancient Egyptians, Sumerians, thousands of years ago. And these civilizations were being visited by aliens. And it is a very controversial idea. And scientists have been really against this idea, and I think it's because there hasn't really been any concrete evidence in their eyes, and in some other people's eyes there is concrete evidence, but there have been no scientific papers published about the subject that I could find, at least in America. Correct me if I'm wrong. If anyone has any that they can link me to, definitely let me know. But yeah, there doesn't seem to be much attention, or at least not much backing to the scenario or trying to do much research about it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's just a crazy idea that some people have. But it is definitely one of the more popular ideas amongst the public, at least. There are a lot of people that believe that the pyramids were created by aliens. I know that for a fact because I've met quite a few of them. So this falls into the realm of pseudoscience. So, and I hate classifying things like this because when you have a term like pseudoscience, it's kind of like it's basically saying like this is fake or debunked. And I mean, that's kind of unfortunate because that's not necessarily the case. But other things that would fall into this realm of pseudoscience would be, so like ancient aliens, okay, ancient astronauts. That's what we're talking about. UFOlogy, paranormal stuff like ghosts, Bigfoot. All of that stuff would be classified as pseudoscience. So it's kind of like academics pretty much, honestly, they just kind of scoff at it. And I mean, I understand why, but at the same time, I don't want anyone to get discouraged for coming up with ideas. But, it is what it is. So what are my thoughts on the Ancient Astronaut Scenario? Am I for it or am I against it? Well, I can't say that I am definitely for it. I don't think any of the research that I've done has led me to believe that aliens for sure were here. I think that every form of quote unquote evidence that they found for this, or like proof, can be explained by normal means. I believe there are perfectly rational explanations to a lot of these claims. But that does not necessarily mean that it's not true. So, For example, like I'm just gonna touch on this real quick, like the pyramids. Could aliens have built it? Yeah. Could humans have built it? Yeah. Humans also could have built it. So like, which one is more likely? You know what I mean? Like, okay, so yeah, it'd be really hard to build the pyramids. Like it, like there's these huge stones. Like how did they move? Like it would be too hard to move them and super dangerous. Blah blah blah. Yeah, whatever. So, but aliens could do it really easy, and maybe they had this certain purpose, and they were like lined up with the stars, and all this other stuff. Okay, that's cool, but is it within the realm of humans to do? Yes, it is. Humans can build that with the tools at the time. It's 100% possible. It would be hard and it would take a while and people probably would die, but like it could be done. So the fact that it can be done by humans is just kind of like, so why are we not going with that? Because that's most likely. And that's just kind of based on what we see, because we don't see any proof of aliens anywhere else, right? So it's, why would we assume them back then? But you know, it's still fun to think about. It really is. And even though I'm not 100% behind it, I don't say I believe it. I don't say I completely disbelieve it either. It is really fun to think about, and I have to give him that. And because you start to get theorizing, you go down this rabbit hole, and you start learning cool things, and it's like some things like really do make a lot of sense. And yeah, it's just cool. So I think it's worth touching on, even if we're not going to get super scientific about it, because this, we're here to have fun and we're here to talk about some cool stuff. And I definitely think that qualifies for both of them. So some of the research that I did, I looked into a few of the books, such as like Chariot of the Gods, some other like famous books in the Ancient Astronaut Scenario. I read about it a little bit in my one book that I constantly come back to for the show, the Stephen Webb's 75 Answers to the Fermi Paradox. He talks about this as well, and it is to be noted that he does not place any amount of faith in this scenario at all. Pretty much says, nah, this isn't real, but he still touches on it, which I appreciate. I'm glad he didn't just completely leave it out, So besides that, I also watched the first episode of Ancient Aliens on History Channel, and this is probably the least amount of research that I've done for an episode. But honestly, that's just because there's not a lot out there. Like I said, there's no scientific journals or no scientific papers in any journals for me to read. And everything else is just kind of hearsay, like from somebody. There's no data. There are some cool findings that I found, but there's nothing conclusive, and it's kind of just, I don't know. There wasn't a whole lot of information, I will say. There's a lot of speculating, and one thing that I did not like is sometimes the way things are presented, especially in Ancient Aliens, they kind of word things in a way that are not necessarily entirely truthful to make it seem to lead you towards leaning towards, did that make sense? Towards the ancient alien theory. So like, for example, the like interpretations with like Ezekiel and the Bible, yeah, like you can interpret that in any way you want. So, like when you read it, it's not necessarily, they can kind of like say it in a way that would lead you to believe a certain way. Just kind of like how they do in church. They do the same thing. So that's where it's hard to find just objective facts, and I think that's where it falls to the individual. Once you start looking at these things, you're going to have to draw your own conclusions from it. You can't really take what other people say, because there's nothing conclusive for you. You have to come up with what to believe. And I don't want to offend anybody, but I think that if you are a reasonable person, that you're more than likely going to agree. Okay, this is gonna sound bad, but I think that like if you're reasonable, you're gonna agree with me where it's yeah, like could be true, could not be true. Like who knows? Is that's kind of how I feel. But I mean, hey, whatever. Okay, so I want to talk about Ancient Aliens, the TV show. And I want to talk about a few of the findings that they, or at least a few of their what would it be called? And I want to talk about some of their examples of evidence for the Ancient Astronaut Scenario. Number one, in the very first episode, they talk about the Sakara Bird. And the Sakara Bird is pretty cool. I believe it was made out of wood, and it dates like thousands of years ago. And this thing is aerodynamic. This little model bird, at least that's what people that are not looking too deep into it, they call it a bird, right? This thing, it's like a little toy, and it's aerodynamic. Like this thing could fly. They test this thing in a wind tunnel, like somewhere where they test aerodynamics, and they're doing like these scans and or they're doing like these tests. And sure enough, this thing could legitimately fly. But well, hold on, there's a caveat there. The design itself, like the proportions, are aerodynamic. Like it could fly, but the material that it's made out of would not work. And it appears to be the shape of some sort of glider. There's no like propeller. There's no wheels or anything. There is like a pointed. I wish I had a picture to show you guys, but if you watch the first episode, you'll see it. There's a pointed front, kind of like a nose, or maybe like a beak of a bird, I guess, but more like a nose of a plane, honestly. And then there are wings, and then there is a tail in the back, which is like a vertical tail. So, like birds have horizontal tails, they're kind of parallel to the ground. This thing has a vertical tail, which would be perpendicular to the ground. And there appears to be like a missing horizontal stabilizer on top. There's like little notches where something seems to have broken off or been removed. So this thing, like pretty much, honestly, could definitely pass for some sort of airplane or glider, yeah. And yeah, after they test, they say that yeah, this thing could glide if it were made out of a different material. So that has led people to think that perhaps this was based off of something else that they had back then, or something that they saw. So maybe they had gliders back then, or maybe they saw aliens with these gliders or these craft, possibly, and they just made this model of it, and that's why it looks so good. To me, hearing about this like back in the day when Ancient Aliens was fairly new, this was game changing. Like I thought this kind of blew my mind. I was like, holy crap. They knew how to make flying things back then. Like that shouldn't have been around. What the heck? Okay, this aliens are real. They've been here. They built the pyramids. That's how I thought. And I think certainly there are a lot of questions here. Like how do they know how to make this thing? Um, people say that I already said this. People say that it's just a bird or whatnot. Uh, I don't know if we're ever gonna have an answer, honestly, because it could go both ways, in my opinion. Who knows? But it is really cool, and it certainly makes the mind think. And I understand how people could use this as a source of evidence. And the next segment in the show, it actually has another example that's very similar. But this time, instead of like a little wood toy, this one's made out of gold. And I think it's like a little smaller, I believe. And this one's also like really old. It's an ancient artifact. But this is cool because they build a scale model, or they upscale it like several times, so it's a lot bigger. They keep the dimensions the same, but they put a motor in it. They add a propeller and they add wheels, and they control it with a remote control, like I think a remote control airplane. And yeah, this thing runs like it rolls down the runway and it takes off and it flies. What? if the wood bird didn't have you convinced, then this has got to, right? Like that's crazy. Granted, we had to add stuff to it to make it fly, like a motor and stuff like that, like a propeller. There was not a propeller on it before. So, I don't know, maybe it was like a glider or something, just like the first one, but they clearly knew how things fly. That's weird, and I don't know if people saying that, oh, it's just a bird or it's just a model of a fish, like that doesn't really hold up to me. I think that needs to be answered. Yeah, I'll give it to them that that's a good one. That's definitely good. A good finding. And it makes me kind of want to continue listening. And I understand why they had it in the first episode. They hit you with the good stuff to get you hooked. And how they went on for 18 seasons, I have no idea. I never even finished season 1, but I can't imagine like there can't be anything like crazier than that, right? Like that's I don't know what better form of evidence would there be? I don't know. And even as good as that is, it's still inconclusive, which kind of sucks because I'm not gonna lie, I want to believe. Like I know a lot of people want to believe, but so yeah, that was the Golden Flyer and the Sakara Bird. I'm sure there's another word for the Golden Flyer, but that's just what I wrote down. Like, and there are some other weird findings too. So let's kind of let's say, for the sake of argument, that back then people were flying around. They had access to these ships or aircraft, and they're flying around the world. So why were things like left undiscovered? You know, for example, why did it take to what? When was Antarctica discovered? 1800, something like that. I could be way off, but why? It certainly wasn't. It wasn't in ancient days, right? Well, there are some maps that actually like predate the supposed discovery of Antarctica by like a couple hundred years or a little more. So that's kind of crazy. There's the sorry if I butcher this, Orontius Phineas map, and there's the Gerardus Mercator map. I cannot pronounce stuff. It's one of my many redeeming qualities. But those are all like both of those maps. They're kind of accurate to how Antarctica looks, and that's weird because Antarctica wasn't discovered yet. So what gives? Maybe they were flying around. Like I don't know. Possibly. That sounds kind of crazy to me, but I mean, who knows? I feel like with this, anything could go, and I don't want to offend anybody that actually believes this, but I mean, come on. I want to talk about how things could be misremembered, or at least not necessarily misremembered, but especially in like religion or like stories. It could be that whoever experienced these things and made these stories didn't know what they were seeing, and then over time it's been distorted and exaggerated and whatnot. So you take things in the Bible uh like Ezekiel and his and basically like God coming in like a ship into the temple that he has to build or whatever. You take I mean, pretty much almost every religion has like deities that come from the sky. So maybe they saw something. Maybe this is actually like there's some shred of truth to it and it's just been changed over time. That's a crazy thought, and that kind of makes sense to me. Definitely, I could see that happening. And that kind of reminds me of the ancient Sumerians. So those people who don't know, Sumerians were like the first civilization, like the first human civilization. And I think they created the wheel, and I believe they might have had like the first writing, as far as like maybe like an alphabet or something like that. That yeah, they're like super important as like the first human civilization, and I don't think we really learn a whole lot about them in school, at least here in the U.S. Um, and I do remember that I saw this video on YouTube a long time ago. It was talking about the Sumerian culture, and that kind of got me thinking because it talked about how their deities were called the Anunnaki, and that they were like sky gods. They came from essentially space, and yeah, their whole mythology is based on them. There's like there's a great flood. There are wars amongst the Anunnaki, like they fight amongst themselves, and they also like mate with humans, and so there's like half breeds, which are kind of like demigods, and then also this part's important, which I forgot to preface the the Anunnaki are like the ones that created us, and I mean this was really cool to hear about. And I kind of looked more into it, and the Anunnaki were supposedly from a ninth planet in our solar system called Nibiru. But here's the thing. So I really like kind of latched onto this, and I was kind of spitting this out a lot to like a lot of my friends. Um, but the thing is, like, I'm not going to read the Sumerian text, right? I'm not going to read their stone tablets. I can't read their stone tablets. It's impossible. You're just going off of what other people are telling you about these tablets, and then it's a translation from this like dead language. So it's really just kind of interpretation. Honestly, you could spin it any way you want, and that's where I feel like I kind of like lost faith in the whole thing. It's you can't really trust anything from back then. So I know that I didn't touch on probably a lot of things that you wanted me to touch on, or at least some people wanted to hear. I didn't get into any of the pyramids. I didn't get any into any of the flattened mountaintops. I didn't get into. I didn't go too deep into it, and the reason is there's 18 seasons of Ancient Aliens. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, and I don't necessarily want to spend that much time on this. I I I could make a whole podcast just about this stuff, and I don't want to do that. That's not where my interest lies. For me, this is kind of like the zoo hypothesis in my last episode. Like it could be real, could not be real. Who knows? With the zoo hypothesis, it's like they don't want us to find them, so we're never going to find them. Right? So like okay, that's cool. Now we're in the exact same spot we were before. So now what? Now what do we do? It's it's kind of the same thing, right? So aliens were here, I guess. But there's no evidence of them. So there's no conclusive evidence of them. So it's like, why do I like? How much time do we need to devote towards something that we're never going to know? Like we're never ever gonna know. I don't know. That's just how I feel. I definitely want to focus on more like actual sciencey stuff, but I think that it was worth touching on, just like the zoo hypothesis is worth touching on. But I definitely think that there was enough information here that I didn't want to just kind of latch it into another episode. I wanted to dedicate some time to kind of talk about it, get people thinking about it, and it's kind of fun. And I think that's going to be about it for this episode. So I want to thank everyone for listening. And you guys can look forward to my retro sci-fi night coming out on Friday, and it's early access on Wednesday for any Patreon members out there. And yeah, thanks for listening. Follow me on Instagram, follow me on TikTok. That thing is taking off. I was not expecting that. And yeah, I will catch you guys next time. I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. Remember to raise your telescopes and never stop on your quest for knowledge, except for maybe a drink. This is The Bar at the Edge of the Universe. I've been your host, Adrian Maddox. Thank you, and good night.